Hey guys, welcome back to another video. So it is Thursday, December 11th, so it's time for another market update. And this week, what we're going to see is that reefer rates, according to FTR Intel, are at the highest level on the spot market in 2 years. Now, the question is what happened to those dry vans and flatbeds? What is causing this increase in spot market rates? So let's chat about all of it, from the rates to ELP to authorities to diesel prices to trying to figure out where the better places are for the three main equipment types. Ready? Let's go. All right, as always, we're going to start by looking at the net change in carrier authorities, where we take a look at how many people opened up an authority versus how many people either got their authority revoked voluntarily or involuntarily. That gives us an idea of the net change in carrier population, not necessarily capacity, because we don't know how many dispatchable trucks are under each authority. And plus, when people come in or open up the authority, it doesn't always mean that they're going to start operating, which is surprising, but that's just the way it goes. So as of last week, we actually gained 14 carriers net week over week. And the reason for this, if you take a look at the red line, you can see that the total gained went up. The total lost also went up, even though it's an inverse relationship. It's just more people opened up their authorities. But again, it does not mean that every single one of these authorities is actually going to result in dispatchable trucks or a dispatchable truck. All right, let's take a look at what is happening with those ELP out of service orders. So November saw 1,815 violations, which is lower than October and September. December, up to December 6th, we are at 289 violations for English language proficiency. Now, we have two maps here. This is the location of where these out of service orders actually happen, and this is just for the month of December. So from December 1st to December 6th, most of them so far happened in Arkansas, 26 of them, followed by Florida, 22. Then we have 17 in Pennsylvania, we have 15 in Wyoming, 12 in Texas, 14 in Arizona. We'll see how this map progresses as time goes on, as the month goes on. All right, the second thing we can take a look at is the carrier location. Which carriers are getting those out of service orders? So carriers based in Texas are by far the most likely to get an out of service order for English language proficiency, followed by Florida, Illinois, and California. So California, Illinois, Texas, and Florida carriers are more likely to get an ELP out of service order. All right, next, let's take a look at what is happening with those diesel prices. So good news this week, diesel prices are lower week over week and month over month. So currently the average is $3.68 per gallon. This is the national average, which is 5 cents lower than last week and 5.5 cents lower than last month. Still 17 cents higher than this time last year. If we take a look at the map, this is the price at the pump. This is last week. This is this week. So the map did get lighter, and we'll take a look at the biggest changes. California is still the most expensive, $5.06 on average per gallon, followed by Washington, $4.87 per gallon. Now, the next map, which is new, shows us the change week over week. The darker an area is, the bigger the drop in diesel prices. So in Colorado, the average price per gallon actually dropped by 15.5 cents. In a place like Iowa, by 10.4 cents. Now, if we take a look at Maine, it actually increased by 1.5 cents. So if you see a negative number when you're playing around with the map, that means that there was a decrease in the average price. A positive number means an increase. All right, let's take a look at diesel minus IFTA without those IFTA taxes. This is last week. This is this week. Also got lighter. The most expensive state, if we remove IFTA, is Washington, $4.29 per gallon. Now let's take a look at what's happening with those rates. And this is what I really wanted to show you, because according to FTR, you will see the reefer in blue, the flatbed in green, and dry van in orange yellow. Reefer is currently at $2.76 per mile on average on the spot market. Now, When you look at the FTR chart, which also shows you what it was last year, you see that the reefer rate currently is at the highest point in 2 years, which is very interesting. But actually, as of last week, this shows last week. As of last week, all three equipment types saw an increase. Flatbeds are up to $2.34. Dry vans are at $2.16 per mile as of last week. All right, now let's take a look at equipment specifics, starting with reefers. So these are the loads. Where are the loads coming out of for reefers on the spot market? Again, Texas, Illinois, California, Pennsylvania, actually also New Jersey and Georgia. This is where the loads usually come out of. Trucks mostly go to California, Texas, and Florida when we're talking about reefers. Now, in terms of the rate per mile map, the darker an area, the higher the average rate per mile. It doesn't mean it's the best area though. This week, the most versatile state for reefers was Texas. And as you can see, the average rate per mile was $2.65, with the highest rate per mile going to the plain states, $5.37, and the lowest going to the West Coast, $1.30. Yeah, we need those long haul rates to improve. So now let's take a look at the changes week over week from last week to this week. As you can see, 4 out of the 5 regions saw an increase in the rate per mile, with the exception of the southern states, and all 5 regions saw an increase in volume. So in terms of the best area to be in for reefers, it's still the Midwest. You can see it's the highest rate per mile, $3.02 on average, and it's also the highest volume, which gives you the ability to choose, right? It gives you more negotiating power because there are more loads to choose from. All right, now let's take a look at what is happening with those dry vans. So loads come out mostly out of Texas, California, and then some of the Midwest as well as Pennsylvania. Trucks go mostly to Texas, California, some of the Midwest, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Florida. If we take a look at the rate per mile map, and yeah, feel free to play around with it on the website, but for the video, we're going to focus on the most versatile state, which was also Texas for dry vans. The average rate per mile here was $2, so not that great, with the highest rate going to the plain states, $3.37, and the lowest also going to the West Coast, $1.29, just like with reefers. Okay, what about the week over week comparison for dry vans? It's all green, with the exception of the Northeast that just didn't have a change in the rate per mile, but pretty much nothing got worse from last week, rates or volumes. In terms of the best place to go for dry vans, it's just like for reefers right now. The Midwest is the better place, higher rate per mile, $2.43 on average, and a much higher volume than the other regions. All right, last but not least, let's take a look at those flatbeds. So in terms of loads actually come out mostly out of the South, specifically Alabama. And trucks, they mostly go to Texas. It doesn't change week over week. It's always the same. In terms of the rate per mile map, you will see a lot of gray areas. That just means that there were no posted rates from these areas like New Mexico or Nebraska. But the most versatile state this week for flatbeds was Alabama. And the average rate per mile is $2.38, with the highest rates going to the South, $2.68. The lowest rate is actually going to the plain states, which is interesting, $2.20. Week over week, let's take a look at what happened this week compared to last week. Unfortunately for flatbeds, it's not as fantastic as for dry vans and reefers this week. 4 out of the 5 regions saw a decrease in the rate per mile, even though all of them saw an increase in the load volume. Now, we'll talk about the reasoning of why we're seeing these increases and decreases right now, or the theories that I have. The best area is still by far the southern states. It's not the highest average rate per mile. It's $2.53, about 5 cents lower than the Midwest. But the volume is there. The only problem with the South is that you're often going to find those shorter loads, right? It's not going to be a long haul situation. So during the week, if you can stay in the South, yeah, you probably have a little bit more negotiating power. All right, now that we talked about the market update, let's talk about what could be the reason for the increase in the rates for reefers and dry vans, but not so much for flatbeds this week. Seasonality. This is my guess. I think it's a seasonal bump right now. Reefers and dry vans usually do better historically in December, especially towards the end of December, because what ends up happening is a lot of capacity leaves for the time being because of the holidays. Volumes sometimes start increasing a little bit because it's the end of the year. There are holidays coming up. Reefers, especially, a lot of people are buying food for the holidays. Flatbeds, on the other hand, they're not as in demand during this time because flatbeds, step decks, just open deck trailers, they usually are closely tied to construction. And what ends up happening is construction slows down during the winter months because of the elements, right? Because of the weather. In terms of whether the market is actually changing, like the foundation, right? A temporary change is not a change in the market. A temporary change is just that. It comes and goes. What we need is the foundation to change. We need the volumes to start increasing. To be able to tell whether the market is really changing, we'll have to take a look at the first quarter of 2026. That's when we'll start getting a better idea of what is happening with the market. Plus, as I already said, volumes do have to increase because the demand for trucks is right now, even though, yes, it has increased pretty much for all three equipment types on the spot market week over week, the demand is still not there, not as much as it should be. So yeah, I think quarter one of 2026 is when we can start making assumptions about what is happening with the market. But for today, just to be on the safe side, just to be prudent and not to give false information, I would say that this has more to do with the fact that it's the end of the year and the holidays. How are you guys doing? Is it easier to negotiate? For me personally, and we're an open deck carrier, right? This is not our time at all, the end of the year. But I find it easier to negotiate right now. And actually, my work days have become shorter. I started booking loads faster for a more or less better rate per mile as of late. So would love to hear your experiences, especially if you're operating dry vans and reefers. Would love to hear what you're seeing. And yeah, wishing you all a fantastic rest of your week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep learning. See you in the next video.